Faraji is a rising sixth grader at Elm City College Preparatory Elementary School, and she is going to open this event tonight with a poem that she has written entitled Bound. So give me one moment. Let me get Faraji. Faraji. Oh, wait a minute, you're muted. Hang on, let me unmute you. All right, Faraji.
Say hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Faraji Johnson. As it was mentioned already, I go to Elm City College Preparatory in New Haven. I wrote this poem for one of my class projects, and it is the first poem I ever wrote. So I hope you enjoy it. Bound. How we are so bound. We can't leave our homes, so we feel bound. Oh, how bored we are. It's depressing on watching our people get shot. It angers me on watching our people die in rights of the world. It makes me anxious on what's going to happen next. What happens next? How much more bound can we get? It's getting me upset and depressed of this mess. In this world, please get rid of it. Give us a rest. It is best, for we are bound. Thank you.
Thank you, Faraji. That was beautiful. I can't believe you're only a rising sixth grader, but I thank you for sharing your beautiful art with us. It's just so important that adults take the time to listen to our young people. Too often adults take up too much space. We think that we know it all when it comes to what our young people need and the issues that they feel are most important, when we should take more time to highlight their voices and their experiences. With that said, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Students for Educational Justice. We are a youth-led, intergenerational nonprofit organization located in New Haven, Connecticut. Through youth-led organizing, we work to dismantle systems of oppression, to fight for racial and educational justice, and to authentically cultivate self-pride in students and young people, especially Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other students of color. I know it's on the slide, but to read our mission and vision, you can find it on our website in the About Us link. While we are very active, and it seems like we're constantly at work to improve the conditions of the systems in which young people live and learn, I will briefly just describe some of SEJ's work. So in 2019, we worked with Representative Bobby Gibson and other youth-led organizations throughout the state to pass Public Act 19-12. This act makes it a requirement for all high schools in the state to offer an elective course on Black Latinx studies by 2022. During this work, we gathered and submitted the written testimony of over 200 people. We brought out our members to the state capitol to testify in person before our legislators. And while it's great that we were able to get this act passed, there's still a lot more work to be done, because what we really wanted during that time was a required course on the history of race and racism, and required anti-racist and anti-bias training for all teachers. However, out of that work came our co-creation of the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective. I'd like to shout out our partners in New London, Hearing Youth Voices, who worked with us in creating this collective. It brings together teachers, teacher educators, students, youth organizers, and others who recognize that while the Black and Latinx elective is a good start, we really need to do more to expand anti-racist teaching, learning, and pedagogy much more broadly. Within this group, SEJ has worked with Hearing Youth Voices to conduct a social justice climate survey. And as of, I believe, June 15th, we've already collected over 900 responses from students throughout the state who are sharing their voices, telling us what's working, what's not working, telling us the things that they have identified as most pressing concerns in their schools. It's just amazing. I know folks are asking if we could share some of the results yet, but we have so many responses that we're not at the point yet where we can share what we've learned, but we will as soon as possible. In addition to that, we are working with CERC, who was charged with convening work groups to develop that curriculum that I had mentioned, the Black and Latinx studies. So we're working on a state level to help with the development of that curriculum to ensure that it is a curriculum of liberation and not a curriculum that serves to oppress our young people. And then finally, we continue to work in real time to meet the needs of our student members. And so that obviously involves work around COVID response. One of the biggest things that we had done during this time is to identify families in need of Wi-Fi devices. Students were given, not all, but students were given Chromebooks, but didn't have access to Wi-Fi and access, therefore, to their education or health-related needs. And so we've been working to provide hotspot devices for families that are in need. One of the main ways that we engage our members is through our weekly member meetings, but during our weekly member meetings, we provide leadership development, political education, and other trainings. And so over the summer of 2020, we will continue on in that work with the 6-week summer intensive. And if you are a parent or you are a young person who is interested in participating in our summer intensive, please reach out to us, let us know. We'd love to have you. Let me clarify. If you are a parent of a student who is interested in participating, because we are a student organization, so parents, sorry, you'll have to find your own training. So with that, I am going to now introduce my deputy director, my right-hand person, really, if I'm being honest, my boss, Brianna Mondesir. Brianna is a rising junior at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. She's been involved with Students for Educational Justice since its inception, as first the social media specialist, the program coordinator, then a program advisor, and finally, she is now the deputy director. She is dedicated to stick around for so long because she is very passionate about the work that SEJ is doing. Growing up, Brianna never saw herself represented in her school's curriculum, which caused her to be ashamed of her identity as a Black person. She doesn't want this to be the narrative for other students of color. Thus, she is adamant about schools teaching a more representational and truthful history that promotes self-pride and BIPOC, which stands for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. Outside of SEJ, Brianna dedicates her time to schoolwork, this is true, reading and writing, and hanging out with friends. So Brianna, I am going to go ahead and spotlight you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Rashonda. So as Rashonda mentioned, my name is Brianna Mondesir. I'm the Deputy Director with Students for Educational Justice. I've had the immense pleasure of working with SEJ for over 2 years now. And I believe that the growth of my personal and professional development just shows how dedicated SEJ is to providing young people access to leadership development opportunities, career development opportunities, and in general, just personal development opportunities. So I will be moderating our panel discussion today. So I want to quickly outline the format of this community discussion. I will shortly introduce our panelists, and then we will begin with a few questions that SEJ has prepared. Afterwards, we will open it up to allow the audience to ask questions of our panelists. However, in the meantime, audience members, please feel free to chat your questions that you have about Juneteenth or how this connects to present day in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Just make sure to send it to Rashonda and she will collect them. I am super excited to have this amazing community discussion and learning session with all of you. And before we begin my introduction of the panelists, I am going to have everyone take a short poll that I am going to launch right now. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I will now launch the poll, and we're just going to take a minute for us to do that. Just give me a second as I get that started. Rashonda, I believe you have to launch the poll. It says I'm logged out.
Oh no, technology. Okay, give me a moment.
Yeah, sorry y'all, just one quick second.
This is what I talked about. Okay, polling, launch poll.
Awesome, so hopefully all of y'all can take a chance to take that poll right now, and we're just gonna take a minute for y'all to complete it, and then Rashonda will share the results, and I will talk more about that.
Who have not yet voted an opportunity to do so, or not voted but respond.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see what we have.
All right, can everyone hear me? Sorry, my internet's being a little weird. So hopefully you can. So do you know about the Juneteenth holiday? 62% said yes, 4% said no, and 34% said a little bit. And then as for did you learn about Juneteenth in school, 99% of individuals said that they did not learn about Juneteenth in school. So we are pretty much expecting these results. And this is why we believe SEJ's work is so important, and as well as why we need to learn this important history in schools and in our classrooms as well. And it's also why we're just having this event. So before we get started, I would like to first introduce our panelists. So I will begin with Risa Nelson. So Risa Nelson is in her 5th year as Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of Yale's Afro-American Cultural Center, which is the oldest Black cultural center in the Ivy League and one of the first in the nation. Affectionately known as the House, the center serves as a home away from home for the university's Black community and for all those who wish to learn about and celebrate the histories, cultures, and traditions of the African diaspora. Through her current role, Dean Nelson provides strategic direction for and oversees all programs, staff, resources, and services offered through the center. She is the first person from New Haven, Connecticut to lead Yale's Afro-American Cultural Center, which is significant as it was established in 1969, in part to strengthen the relationship between the Black campus and local communities. With 17 years of experience in higher education administration, Dean Nelson has supported student success through working in multicultural affairs, experiential and service learning, campus activities, and residential life. She earned her master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia University in higher and post-secondary education, and her bachelor's degree from Northeastern University in English and in multi-ethnic American studies, where she also wrote her honors thesis on multicultural affairs at Hopkins School, her high school. So welcome, Dean Nelson. Next, we have Frank Mitchell. Frank Mitchell is a humanities practitioner writer, curator, and educator committed to teaching through objects and complicating the culture around American history's difficult places. His explorations have taken form in exhibitions, media projects, publications, community research programs, multimedia installations, and performance. As a curator, his exhibitions include Afro-Cosmologies, American Reflections, 40 Acres, and the Promise of a Black Pastoral. He shares writing credits on the Connecticut Public Television documentaries African Americans in Connecticut, Parts 1, 2, and independent documentary Unsung Heroes, the Music of Jazz in New Haven. A graduate of the University of Michigan's program in American Culture, Mitchell is also an alumnus of the African American Studies program at Yale University and Bowdoin College. So thank you, Frank. Last but not least, we have Benny Nsumbu. Benny is currently a rising sophomore at Boston College. She has been a part of SEJ since 2017. While socially isolated at home due to COVID-19, she has been exploring her spirituality, practicing self-care, and binge-watching The Real Housewives of Atlanta. Benny wanted to get involved with SEJ because she believes that all students should learn the true history of the United States, which cannot be told without discussing race and racism. Benny hopes that through SEJ, race and racism will become a regular school subject all over Connecticut and maybe even the country. I would also like to say that Benny was also our program coordinator and a huge part of SEJ student leadership before she went off to college. So thank you to all of our panelists for being here and engaging in this conversation. So we're going to start then with the first question. So with this first question we will pose, every one of the panelists will answer. First Benny, then Frank, and then finally Risa. And it can just be in that order. So the question is, when did you first learn about Juneteenth? What does Juneteenth mean to you, or why do you think it is important? So I will unmute all of you, and then we can just go from there.
When,
You're all set.
all good?
Yes.
Okay, hello. When did I learn about Juneteenth? I don't remember a specific moment in time that I learned about it, but I do know that it was definitely after I joined SEJ and just being around the social justice circle in Connecticut. I must have just heard it in passing and I just like knew what it was, but I never thought of it as an actual day to celebrate or to acknowledge. It was just the day that all slaves were freed, and that was pretty much all that I knew about it until recently.
Thank you. Next, we're going to have Frank.
Hey, so first of all, thank again for putting this all together. This is a great celebration. It's really encouraging to see so many folks on the call, familiar folks and new folks. Thanks for making time. So when did I first hear about Juneteenth? So I grew up in Ohio, though I've now lived in New Haven almost as long as I lived in Ohio. And I had cousins and relatives in California and Texas, and they celebrated Juneteenth. So we heard about it through them, though we did not participate, and we didn't celebrate it in the Midwest, or in my part of the Midwest at that point. What I actually love about Juneteenth is it's sort of the perfect mix of commemoration and celebration. It feels virtuous, but it feels also joyful. There's a parade, there's iconic food, red pop. I mean, there's lots to be excited about, but it also has some of the solemn nature of the kinds of celebrations that really characterize Black history and Black culture. It's sort of fascinating that it has persisted in ways that other celebrations from the 19th century and even 18th century, like Emancipation Day celebrations or Lincoln's birthday celebrations, haven't. And so I credit a good name, Juneteenth's a better name, and the promise of fun. So balancing the virtue with the celebration. And there was a third part of the question I'm forgetting. What was it?
That was just a general sort of why do you think it's important, or like what does it personally mean to you?
Yeah.
But I think you've answered that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then finally, we'll have Risa talk next.
Thank you again, everyone, for inviting me to be a part of this. And Rashonda, Brianna, thank you for putting this together. I honestly don't remember a time not knowing about Juneteenth. It was a time for my family to get together and just reconnect. And I think in terms of what it means to me, first off, I want to say that I think it's important to bring to life the spirit of Juneteenth every day, just like we celebrate Black history every day, or at least I do and the House does, and not just in the shortest month of the year. And it's really a time to, Juneteenth is really a time to reflect and celebrate, to educate and to act. And so celebrating our history, our liberation, our strength, our survival, our cultures, our solidarity, our connectedness, coming together to celebrate Black joy. A lot of people don't know that Juneteenth was also sometimes called Jubilee Day. So remembering our joy is really key for me. Educating people on Black American history as American history is super important, and just reminding folks that our lives, our work, our contributions have enriched this country from when we first stepped foot in the Americas, which was before Columbus, I might add. And then act. You know, Juneteenth celebrations have for a very long time been a time for rallying our community and agitating folks in the best of ways, and folks who support our community to become more aware of issues that are affecting us in our current day, and educating them on how and encouraging them to act on them. And specifically, I'm thinking about voter registration, which was also a key component of many different Juneteenth celebrations.
Right. Thank you so much. I completely agree. I think a lot of times the history we laud as like American history, or we want to celebrate, so often it just includes the narrative of white folks. And I think we really need to start showing how American history includes a vast amount of people who are living on this continent and have lived on this continent for a long period of time. So thank you. So now we have a next question for Frank. Frank, would you be able to talk more about how the United States allowed its enslavement of Black people to continue for more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation? And just about its history?
Sure, I can give that a shot. I think it's important to note that freedom comes in waves, and it's a process. Certainly, it has been for Africans in the Americas and the rest of the world. That's true as well. So here in Connecticut and in New Haven especially, gradual emancipation arrives in 1780 or so, and they're revising it. And every time that people feel like they're approaching freedom, or some part of the population is gaining freedom, they do have a jubilee. There is a celebration. People parade on the green. And as early as 1782, 83, there are parades on the green for the folks who have gained their freedom in that first round of emancipation, or gradual emancipation. And that continues to happen right up until 1870, when probably the largest Jubilee celebration happens with Civil War veterans, Black soldiers from the Civil War, all kinds of families who've been reunited, folks who have moved into this area. So there is that that desire to come together and celebrate, to parade and take control of the space as people are gaining their freedom as early as the late 1700s, certainly here in Connecticut. So if we're looking at history broadly, it's a process. And in many ways, what happens at the end there in Galveston is following a template that is started in parts of New England and other parts of the country as people gain their freedom. What we forget in thinking about what happens there on Juneteenth is that the nation had been at war, right? And so even as President Lincoln is enacting the Emancipation Proclamation in '63 and encouraging free Blacks to serve in the military, he is not the president of all of the country anymore. He's really the president of the Union, and the Confederacy can do it at once. So the proclamation does say that those enslaved folks who are in states that are in revolt are free, but you still had to get people to freedom. And so what you see as Union forces make their way south and have victories at this point, people are able to get themselves to the safety of Union soldiers, and those folks are technically free. And as you can imagine, it takes a long time to get all the way down to Galveston. Galveston is an island, and it's on the coast of Texas, so it's basically about as far as you're going to get in the South. It's not Cuba, but for all intents and purposes, it was in some ways like going to Cuba. So those folks there in Galveston would have been the last people to hear about freedom. It's sort of remarkable that they heard 2 months after the end of the war and not even longer. So those 2 years seem like an incredibly long time from our perspective, but in fact, the war is going on, and the proclamation did a lot of great work tactically. It did demoralize Southerners. It did encourage folks who could get to freedom to get to freedom, and it did create a lot of disruption, but it couldn't get everybody who was in a state that was in revolt to Union troops and to freedom. But eventually that happens.
Thank you. That is a really good point. I think it's something that, at least for myself, I don't always remember. So thank you for highlighting that. And then before we go on to the next question, I would also just like to remind folks again that at any point as questions come up that you have about this topic we're talking about, or panelists, feel free to put it in the chat and send that to Rashonda. And during the community discussion part, which will be coming shortly, we will address those. All right, so the next question is for Benny. We want to know more, as a student, what does it mean to you that Juneteenth and other important Black historical events have been left out of the school curriculum, and it's something that, we just do not learn?
Yeah, I mean, it's very disheartening and disappointing as a student, a Black student, to be in class and not learn these important events that that have happened, not just in America, but like to your people. And so, yeah, it just makes you feel disconnected, and it's very important that people, sorry, we all know that history is important and we all need to learn it. But like if we don't learn it, we disconnect from our ancestors, we disconnect from our traditions, our culture, our roots. We lose a part of ourselves, our identity. And I've seen it, witnessed it I continue to witness it with my own eyes among, young Black kids my age, and just how they address their Blackness and, their culture and the way they talk about it. And it is changing, thankfully, but, there's still a lot of work to be done. And it's very, very, very tragic that, we have lost that history, or not lost, just haven't learned it.
Right, exactly. Thank you for that. And I will highlight again that I completely agree. I think the history that we don't learn in schools is very disheartening, especially kind of, as Rashonda mentioned about myself growing up, I never saw sort of the wide, complicated history of Black folks in America, in Connecticut. I was actually telling someone I didn't know anything about the Amistad or anything related to that until like 2 months ago. And I pretty much have gone to New Haven schools all my life. So that just shows you. But thank you, Benny.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that, like, the history that we are taught, it makes us seem like one-dimensional, and that there aren't these different facets of our culture, of our lives, of American culture, of American history. It's always like you were slaves, and then you fought, and you were free, and then Obama came and racism ended, and it's like, that's not, like, we're not just that. Like, hello, like, I mean, there's so many parts of us that we don't acknowledge, like, even just acknowledging that, like, there are Black folks that were against the civil rights movement at one point. Like, just talking about that and bringing out those and fleshing out those nuances and like getting to the roots of these issues so that we can like undo them. And yeah, it's so harmful that we don't learn those like little details that aren't so little.
Right, exactly. Thank you for that, Benny. All right. So the next question is for Risa. Based on what we saw from the polls, where there was 99% of individuals on this call right now had never learned about Juneteenth in schools, are there other important Black history events that have happened, you know, even in New Haven, that are left out of the school curriculum and that, you know, people should know more about?
Yeah, I want to go off of what you just spoke about, that you just found out about the Amistad slave revolt. I remember, and Rashonda and I saw Matt Hayes on here, so you all may remember, I think it was in the 5th grade, 4th or 5th grade. This was a major part of our curriculum here growing up, and it was a huge source of pride in across New Haven. And so for those of you who don't know, just a quick recap of this important moment. In 1839, Joseph Cinque and his fellow Mende tribespeople who were abducted and were en route on La Amistad ship to Cuba to be enslaved. They took over the ship and they sought to return it to Sierra Leone, where they came from, but ultimately they landed in New Haven and were incarcerated here. In that case, ultimately was resolved by the US Supreme Court in 1841 when it ruled that the Mende had actually been illegally transported and held as slaves and had rebelled in self-defense. It ordered them free, but the government did not provide any type of aid to return them home. So 35 survivors returned to West Africa in 1842 with funds raised by the United Missionary Society, which was a Black group founded by James W.C. Pennington, who was an escapee from slavery himself, who studied at Yale Divinity School in the 1830s. Also, Edward Boucher, folks probably know his name. I hope they know his name. He was the second known Black person to graduate from Yale College in 1874, and he earned his PhD in physics from Yale in 1876, becoming the first Black person to earn a doctorate in an American university. He was elected also to one of the earliest Black people to be elected to the Phi Beta Kappa Society, but then had great difficulty finding work as a university professor due to unsurprisingly, racial discrimination. A lot of people don't know also, I thought this was just a really interesting fact that a lot of folks have skipped over, but the first historically Black college was actually proposed to be built here in New Haven. Simeon Jocelyn sought to establish what was called a Negro college here in New Haven. After attending Yale briefly in 1823, he went on to become the founding pastor of the congregation that became the Dixville Avenue Congregational Church, which many of you may know. And ultimately, the 1831 proposal for this first Black college was opposed by City Hall. We actually just celebrated the 50th anniversary of May Day 1970. And so folks from across New Haven and Connecticut, and really New England, came here to the Green to protest the trials of Black Panther leaders Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins. But I also want to say, I think it's really important to highlight our everyday history, acknowledging the extraordinary and just a fully personal history that makes us up individually and in terms of our families, makes gives us who we are and who our identities are. And so I'm just going to quickly shout out my uncle who recently passed. So I want to lift him up and say that he actually opened up, Henry Marcellus Johnson, he opened up the first Black barbershop on the east side of Bridgeport. And that helped pave the way for Black entrepreneurship in the area. And knowing that story just made a huge impact on me growing up in terms of what I could see myself doing, what I have seen my family do, what I have seen Black folks do to thrive. And it just brought me so much pride for my family and for my culture. And so I encourage others to learn about those kinds of family stories and share them. And that's also a really great way to connect across generations too.
I completely agree. Thank you, Risa, so much for that. I would just say, you know, my family all come from Haiti, and for me, I didn't start learning more about Haitian history until I entered high school, and that was not due to anything the school necessarily did. I was aimlessly flipping through a history book one day, and I saw a name that was one of the major leaders of the Haitian Revolution. And I went home and I was like, who is this guy? And then that kind of just started a conversation with my parents about the Haitian Revolution and how was the first successful Black revolution. So I agree. Okay then, thank you. So we have another question that can be posed to anyone, any of our panelists. So whoever is interested in answering, please feel free to do so. The question is, and Risa touched on this a little bit, but who exactly should celebrate Juneteenth? Should everyone, oh, sorry.
Brianna, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to clarify, Dean Nelson?
Sorry. Yes, Dean Nelson. I apologize. Dean Nelson talked a little bit about sort of the issue of Juneteenth not being considered an American holiday, but just a little bit more. Should everyone, no matter race or ethnicity, be able to celebrate it as a holiday, or should this strictly be something that Black Americans can celebrate within our culture?
I'll speak. I don't know if I'm going out of turn or anything, but a couple of things I actually want to say. I also want to shout out the Dixville Creative Arts Center, which was actually based in the Congregational Church there, that I spoke about a little bit earlier. This was, I can't remember when it opened, honestly. I want to say the 70s, maybe the 80s, and I'm dating myself here. But I think it was a tremendous educational and just foundational moment in my life, and just a truly empowering space for us. The kids who were there, most of us were Black. It was based on the curriculum that they had was based on the Black arts movement. And so we, when we got there after school, we would learn about our histories, Black histories, in a number of different areas, whether that was, you know, the arts, music, performance, whether that was history, language arts, etc. So I would also love to see something, you know, different programs like that be embraced more broadly, not just in New Haven, but really across the world, and for everybody. But in terms of who should celebrate Juneteenth, everybody. I feel like everybody should celebrate Juneteenth because we should celebrate independence in America. And by now, I think everyone can acknowledge, or should acknowledge, that the 4th of July was not actually Independence Day for all those who lived in America. But I also believe that Black people, our voices, our issues should be centered, amplified, and elevated on Juneteenth. And so those who celebrate with us should keep that in mind. And I would hate for this holiday to be co-opted by different corporations for their profits, especially not Black owned corporations. Or I would hate to see that this would become a holiday for just fireworks and drinking. And I would also hate for the actual meaning of the holiday to be lost. So I think that it should be fully recognized. The fact that I think it's 3 states still today do not recognize it, Hawaii and the Dakotas. But I think it should be recognized by all as a day for reflection and a call to consistent ongoing action.
And I'm going to agree. It's definitely an opportunity for us to be really deliberate about how we celebrate. I think the other big chance for that was MLK Day, and I think we're still wrestling with how to hold on to that and keep it sacred in certain ways. And this one, particularly this year, as companies are wrestling with making it a paid holiday, and people are talking about what are the ways to celebrate it and what should African-American employees do and other employees do. It's a chance for folks who feel invested in the culture to think about ways to leave a legacy and to use this particular celebration as a chance to do that. Again, we have all these holidays that are littered in our past, Emancipation Day, Lincoln's birthday, that we don't celebrate and that have fallen away for some reason. And this one has persisted, and it's a chance for folks who care about and have this history and are thinking about the future to be really deliberate in how it's programmed and how we balance the celebratory parts, the things that are fun, with the chance to have history lessons or to be in church or to pass on important messages and to think about the future. And I think all those things need to be present in how we push forward with Juneteenth now that it's in the public arena in a lot of big ways.
Yeah, and I just want to echo also that like our history isn't like a separate thing from like everything else that happens in America. Like Juneteenth, it freed Black people. It allowed everyone in this country to finally be a citizen and to live here freely. So we should all be celebrating that everyone finally has this chance to be or to live the American dream in a way. And so for me, the idea of like only Black people celebrating it would be sort of contradictory to the idea that Black history is also American history.
Exactly. Thank you all so much for that. I completely agree. And then so kind of one of our final questions we have, again, for anyone to answer who would like to say something about this. We hear a lot about Black men's role in history, for example, Black men's role, for example, fighting as Union soldiers in the Civil War. Can we speak on sort of Black women's role in the final emancipation of enslaved people as well? And sort of like highlight any of those less highlighted individuals, if we know about any of them.
I'm not a historian, so I'm just going to say a quick moment, a quick thing that, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman are obviously some names that come to mind, I hope to everyone's minds here. But we know that Black women have always been at the forefront of the movements, several movements, all movements, I would say, for Black liberation, power, and lives. And we see that today, even if their efforts and their names have been erased. And so I'm hopeful, maybe Frank, you can talk a little bit about this, but I'm hopeful that their legacies and their histories are shared more broadly.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Certainly we can point to Harriet Tubman and her work as a Civil War activist and soldier and spy. There was a Black soldiers, the 29th, mustered in here in New Haven, and there would have been a lot of local women who helped make that possible, who supported those soldiers who were there when they mustered in and who maintained life here in New Haven as Connecticut's Black soldiers marched all around the country. And in Hartford, Addie Thomas would have been somebody who went off to teach as schools opened in the South. We talked about the folks who left and sought refuge with Union forces, and at a certain point there needed to be schools, they needed a place to put people. And a number of Black women from the North went south and helped to start schools for the folks who were then called contraband of war. So there are lots of really interesting individual stories. There are certainly Black nurse corps who helped in the Civil War. The work continues in making these kind of granular stories that we can all talk about, names we'll all know. But those documents are definitely out there if you're really curious about who was connected to Black soldiers in the Civil War. And there are some great women in our libraries to this day, and in places like Beinecke, where we can learn more about that, who are there. So those stories are out there. And certainly here in Connecticut, there's still so much incredible history that's yet to be uncovered in our state library. Folks who were petitioning for their own freedom in and around this state, young women as gradual emancipation proceeds, who were going to see constables and other kinds of legal figures and pushing for their own freedom when they had been overlooked. So there's a lot of that out there. And the nice thing about being in a state that has such a long history is that there's still so much that we can uncover. If we're curious and if we want to know, in every town around this state, there are still stories that we can tell about the long ago past and about what happened, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And just 50 years ago, as we were talking about the Panther trials, there is a great exhibition and program series on view right now at ArtSpace. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a great chance to reconnect with some aspects of New Haven history. And it should be easy to reach on ArtSpace's website. So it's just one thing you can do if you're thinking about what to do to celebrate Juneteenth or the legacy of Juneteenth easily online.
Great, thanks y'all. We really appreciate that. So at this point, we're now going to transition over to the audience questions. So continue to send in questions and we'll just go through them as we have time. So first, Georgia has a question of, when was Juneteenth sort of known as Juneteenth or recognized as a holiday? It was certainly not part of my vernacular growing up, though I knew the dates of the 13th Amendment, but heard Juneteenth later in life.
I'll just jump in there. So I think as early as 1866, it becomes fairly formal for folks in Texas. And people are already, if you're thinking about those years of Reconstruction, as folks who are able are pushing out of these small towns and places and looking for freedom in new ways, they're taking the idea of Juneteenth with them and sort of imagining how they'd celebrate. It becomes a bit more established as Black folks in Houston by the 1870s and 1880s begin to think about creating a space where they can have a truly formal Juneteenth celebration. And so these days there's a park that has this long history of being the site for Juneteenth. But it's within a year of the actual end of slavery.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question. Robert wants to know, are the panelists familiar with the Lincoln School de facto segregation ruling by the Supreme Court in 1960? It found that New Rochelle has created a segregated Black elementary school. It ushered in busing in the northern states.
And it's fine if no one knows.
Yeah.
It was a question, so maybe that's just something that we can, tell ourselves to look more into.
Definitely something to look into. Thank you for that.
Great, thank you. So Nikita asked, what do we need to do in order to have our history included in all school curriculums early and throughout the entire school experience?
Getting together with community members, organizing, talking to students about what they want to learn about, talking to teachers, going into schools and seeing what is going on and formulating some kind of plan and strategy of attack. I know for us, for passing the bill, that's literally what happened. I found out about SEJ through our former executive director, Hillary. She came into my class and they talked about SEJ and I joined. And then when we decided to do this campaign for getting a history of race and racism, we talked to the students to figure out, like, what are we learning in class? We talked to lots of teachers about teaching the stuff, how they feel about it, what kind of trainings they get, if they get them at all. And then we just started rounding people up, talking to different orgs, citywide, Youth Coalition, Hearing Youth Voices, as was mentioned, like we just like rounded up the community and just like made sure that people knew what it is that we were fighting for, how to fight for, how they could help. So yeah, and we did petitions, so like even people who weren't connected to the education system in any way could also help out and make sure that this was passed. So.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, and thank you for that and for your work in moving all of this forward. And I would also say that we need many more voices in this, that we need non-Black voices in this as well, and pushing for this curriculum to be expanded. I think that it's important that families, caregivers, students, community members, everyone make the expectation and demand very clear to teachers and administrators that this must be a part of the curriculum, not just as supplemental information or optional information, but as core. This is, you know, central and you know, truly valuable, integral to you know, American education. So, but I do think that we need more voices, and not always the choir. We need folks who don't always look like us, that acknowledge this is their history as well, and they need to learn about it.
And this might be redundant, but I think the distinction between African American history and anti-racism and racism training needs to be clear, that those are really two different things, that the work that you do around anti-racism is not the same thing as learning Black history. Those are two different tracks, and to the extent we can advocate for those two moments, it's a good thing.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for all of your responses. So we have another question. V is wondering, how do you maintain joy in celebrating Juneteenth when in many ways slavery hasn't ended, especially in light of police brutality, Indigenous death because of COVID, etc.? What keeps you motivated, and what makes you feel excited about Juneteenth?
I love this question. Oh my gosh, because I've been trying to figure out how it's so hard with, especially with our phones. We just get all this information, all this news at once, and it can be so overwhelming. I think for me, keeping that joy and that motivation, I just go crazy and I listen and I watch everything Black joy, and I like to go on Netflix, watch a movie. I really, really encourage people to just find things that show them or represent Black joy to them, and just like surround yourself with it, sit in it, enjoy it, laugh, smile, dance, whatever you can do. Because afterwards you're like, wow, this is like amazing, and you're like fueled with all that positive energy, which you can then channel into, you know, that all the negative mess that you see, you know, on social media and everything, because now you have that power of, like, again, your history, your roots, your ancestors, your culture behind you to be like, no, this is wrong, and fight it.
Yes, thank you, Benny. I really appreciate that. And I think I would just also add, I saw this post kind of, you're saying, you know, right now we're getting so much news through Instagram and other social medias. And I saw this one post that said, you know, Black people and people of color are facing, especially Black people right now, facing a lot of trauma and difficulties, and just fighting for our survival as we face many crises in our lives. But somehow we still find a way to laugh and be joyful and celebrate. So I'm really thankful for that, and I'm glad you found ways to still, you know, be joyful and excited about this, and just knowing that, you know, they tried to kill us. You know, like, basically Black people, we weren't supposed to get to this area, and no matter like what's happened, like, we've continued to survive and grow and prosper. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add,
oh yeah, go ahead.
it's a really trying time, but we have so many more incredible resources than we've ever had before. So joy really is at your fingertips, and the challenge is just, how do you find it? I mean, there's incredible visual art out there, there's incredible music, there's always something to discover. And whether it's walking down the street, and we live in a city and in a region where there's a lot to discover every day. We've got incredible public art. There's an amazing monument to the soldiers of the 29th in a park here in New Haven. There's a monument to the Amistad captives here in downtown New Haven. There's a lot to see and to appreciate if we really want to find joy and find joy in history. There are tons of opportunities. So it is a trying time. It gets harder every day, it seems like, and yet there are these great lessons from history, even in this city, where, you know, people didn't have the same kind of slavery that they had in Georgia. that we can benefit from. So if you're feeling despair, take a walk outside and see some of the great pieces of the past that folks who lived here 100 years ago left for us. And that should inspire us all.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the next question. So kind of on a similar route as the last question, Carlin asks, how can we celebrate / acknowledge this holiday as it is a tricky time of year? Most schools are not in session. What would be an effective way to revere it among society so it doesn't just become a day off for us?
There are many different events happening, not just this one, but over the next few days. So if you're on social media, I would say, check it out. You can also go to the house's Instagram, which is Yale AFAM House. You'll see later today a posting of all of the things that are happening in the area. So you can just take advantage of what is already going on. But also, like I said at the beginning of our talk, this was a time for me and my family to just come together. It didn't have to be anything formal, anything large necessarily. It really was just about connecting and reflecting and getting together for the joy that we're talking about. And I think that's really important. And not everything has to be, a major production. That is, of course, a lot of fun. The celebration is important. But, even just sitting and thinking about what this day means is also great.
Yeah, and if you're looking for something immediately, SEJ is also hosting an event tomorrow. I think it's on the green. Yes, it's on the New Haven Green tomorrow at 3 p.m. And so you can come join a bunch of Black folks and celebrate Juneteenth.
And just to be clear, it goes from the green over to East Rock Park. So it is it's a moving celebration.
Correct. Thanks, y'all, for highlighting that. Would anyone else like to answer the question, or?
Sure, I'll jump in. So if you aren't going to be on the green sounds great. And again, it's long been a place where we have had Jubilee celebrations. So we all should get out on the green tomorrow and march around a little bit, because that would be in the spirit of what's happened here to celebrate freedom centuries before. But if you're not going to do that, there's some great things online. The Schomburg Center is doing something tomorrow. The UCC is doing something online, sort of a worship service. So there are lots of great opportunities. And if you're going to be at home, it's a great chance to cook something good for yourself, to kind of do that self-care and experience joy on your own. So Juneteenth has got really, really important foods: the Trinity, the watermelon, the red pop, and barbecue. So put together a great meal that pulls on kind of those themes. That's another way of celebrating and being in the spirit and in the tradition of this history.
Right. Thank you. You also just made me hungry, Frank. But that's very true. Okay, so on to another question. Candace said, I feel an immense sense of guilt not knowing about Juneteenth until adulthood and then not prioritizing it because the country doesn't. How do we set aside our guilt and move forward?
I mean, I probably would say perhaps sit with the guilt and feel that guilt a little bit, but recognize it doesn't necessarily do anything for you or for our community to sit in that. And so get out there, come down to the green, or take advantage of all of the different opportunities that there are now, and so that's a beautiful thing. Let other people know and celebrate. Come on out.
Right. Thanks, y'all. Or thank you, Dean Nelson. All right, so Josh asks, is there any literature or documentaries by Black creators that you would recommend to people who want to learn more about Juneteenth? Unfortunately.
Before folks answer. Sorry, this is Rashonda. I just want to note that we will be sharing some resources at the end of this discussion, but I now remove myself from conversation and you all can answer.
Yes.
Most of the resources that I can think of off the top of my head are for younger audiences, so that's a little hard. But I'm going to give that some thought. I wanted to do something where I could put things in the chat that we could use afterwards, and I didn't pull them all over. So, but there are some really great moments in literature and in film that sort of riff on the idea of Juneteenth. But I would almost prefer just to talk about some really great things you should be looking at generally, like, and it almost gets to be trite, but like Daughters of the Dust, because it gives you this great sense of life as people were leaving a certain moment in Black culture and moving into the idea of the North, or that kind of big change. So those kinds of incredibly pivotal moments in the culture when things shifted. But yeah, I'm gonna think about that.
We
That would
did
be
have,
one. Daughters of the Dust, for sure.
thank you. Thank you so much. We did though have a question from Lakeisha about, are there any ideas on how to teach school-age children about Juneteenth? So maybe you could share some of those resources or things you know that are for a younger audience.
It almost would be easier to put them in the chat, to try and pull them into the chat, or find a way to list them, because I had them as a file. Maybe I'll try and do that.
Yep, no problem. You could just send those to Rashonda and then we could share at the end. When Rashonda said, we will be sharing other resources as well. So thank you.
And I also just added a link in the chat.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have another question from Nikita asking, do you know if the teachers know the history already and could teach it, or do they feel they need to learn it themselves?
I missed the beginning of that, so I wasn't sure if that was directed at anyone in particular. But I would say my guess would be, you know, if folks on this call are also saying that they were unsure or you know, didn't know about Juneteenth before, I would probably guess that many of our teachers don't know. You know, making it clear for why we need even greater education. So more teacher education.
Most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and I guess I would agree, having worked and done some curriculum development projects with folks, that it is an area that is complicated for people to teach, and people feel tentative about it because it is such a minefield, and it's not going to get any easier. So I think the challenge for all of us is to find ways to share the history and to give people space to be okay with stumbling into it, because the harder it is to have the conversations, the more people don't want to have them. So I think there's the role for all of us to make it easier to get this material out to people, because I know as we've done trainings with educators around this kind of work, people have been incredibly tentative and anxious about, what if I say the wrong thing? What will that lead to? And we've all seen, when you say the wrong thing, what that leads to. So pushing the information out there and making it okay to have these conversations is really a critical step, and it's the first step.
I also just want to say, in terms of resources for teacher education, also, I think I saw Tom Thurston on here earlier. The Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition also offers teacher professional development programs. There's a lot of information that they offer for free and online. So I would suggest going to that as well. And that's, I think, glc.yale.edu. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but I would just like to note that this event ends around 6:30, FYI, for anyone who might be wondering. So another kind of just more general question we have for our panelists, how does Juneteenth tie into a wider lack of dissemination of knowledge to Black folks / students? Example, enslaved Black people didn't know they were free based on the Emancipation Proclamation. So what does this say about how Black people lack access to the knowledge of their own liberation due to systemic injustices and racism? I know that's a big one.
It's a big one. It's definitely a big one, and it's real. And I think that while I'm acknowledging that, I also have, most of us now have access to a phone or internet. And, I think that we can and should really be searching all of the resources out that we can ourselves. If there's a question that we have, and this is not just for Black people, if there's a question that we have, Google it, and I want to say that I think a lot of us are very quick to say, hey, do you know about X, Y, and Z? Or can you tell me about X, Y, and Z? But there's something that is so beautiful and fulfilling about self-discovery and finding this information out on one's own. Going to the library when things, really fully open back up, going to the library and taking advantage, like Frank was saying earlier, of all of the different resources that are available here. It's just a matter of getting out there. But so much of that can be done online now too.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, freedom was a process. Many folks knew they were free. There were plenty of folks in the North who understood the Emancipation Proclamation. The reason that we have Watch Night is in many ways tied to the proclamation. So there were folks who didn't get the news until much later, but many people did. That said, we do wrestle with how we share information, how we make history available, kind of what are the ways in which these stories get out there. And I think it's doing the work just like this. I was really intrigued to see that the latest version of the anti-racist branding is one for babies, which is published like yesterday or something like that. So finding all kinds of ways to push that message out to whatever audience you can, even if it's a little cardboard baby book that helps babies, toddlers, not to be anti-racist. That's how we're going to have to do it. And I think that it's going to come from conversations. It's going to come from social media. It's going to come from really innovative ways of pushing the culture, but it is pushing the culture. And we've done an amazing job of revolutionizing popular culture, and yet our ability to drive content in the culture that educates us has not been as good. And so we should be working on that, all of us, in our plays, in our movies, in our popular music, in the meals that we're serving and eating. Kind of everywhere we go can be a lesson if we want it to be, and we just have to want it to be.
Right, thank you. So just because we're getting close to time, this is going to be our final question. So for all of our panelists, hopefully you can just put something to this. I think we just all want to know, where do we go from here, or maybe something that you want us to leave and think about as we sort of continue. We will be, as Roshana said, providing resources and talking more about ways people can get involved, but kind of like, what should we be thinking, what should we be doing, or anything you want to sort of just highlight once more for our audience before we leave?
I'm gonna say something that may not be as popular. I think taking care of ourselves, self-care, truly is a revolutionary act, especially in this time. And so for my fellow Black folks on this call, take care of yourselves. That's especially while we are in the middle of this global pandemic that is disproportionately affecting, and killing Black people. We have to focus on our wellness, on our self-care, on our well-being. And I mean that in all ways, mental, spiritual, financial, etc. I think for everyone, we must educate ourselves. We must take that on as a personal duty. We must educate others as well. When we have the capacity, we don't always have to educate everybody. Sometimes you don't have the capacity, and sometimes you can say, that's available on Google. And I really do mean that. But educating ourselves, our families, and others on Black history, on race, and anti-Black oppression, as well as current issues. You know, we all have our work to do in undoing a lot of internalized racism and misogynoir, and other forms of oppression as well. And so I think just, again, taking advantage of all of the resources that we have at our fingertips now, that many of us are more homebound these days, but also there are tons of universities, institutions, educational institutions, and resources in the area that are really starting to open back up. And vote.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would agree totally with Risa. We should definitely be thinking about voting. And I would just add, document what we're doing. I'm grateful we started with a poem. Please keep poetry out there and document it. As we're creating work, as we're telling stories, as we're living, let's make sure that we're leaving a legacy for people, and thinking about how deliberate we can be in that. People like Nancy Green, who was Aunt Jemima, or who embodied Aunt Jemima at the beginning of the 20th century, didn't have the same resources we have now, and she couldn't have imagined what her legacy would be. We can probably imagine what ours might be. So documenting, thinking about the future, and making sure that as we're making choices, we're aware of why we're making them and what the potential impact is.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what everyone else has said. Educate yourselves, take care of yourselves. I also would like people to just question everything they've known. Like, I mean, it's really powerful when you realize just how much a lot of what we've been taught, like, falls apart once you start to just ask these little bit of questions, and it's like everything is just comes, it falls apart. And that's like when you can start doing the work to make sure that those ideas, those systems, or those institutions just don't exist anymore. Confront your biases, confront just like the way you react in certain situations, and how you feel about what you're reading or what you're seeing. Because the real work is the internal work and the work that you do with the people closest to you. And so I just encourage folks to do that.
Absolutely. And I'll also just add on a little quick suggestion. Folks might want to check out Undoing Racism, which is offered by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. It's oftentimes coordinated here by or through Citywide Youth Coalition. So, and you can ask Rashonda, I think you're getting in on it too. And so, you know, it's just another really great opportunity for folks to undo all of the things that we have been taught, and to start questioning, like Benny was saying, to question our educational systems, and to learn for ourselves and about ourselves.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists for coming today and just sharing their expertise and their knowledge and just their feelings with us. I've greatly appreciated, and I've greatly appreciated the new things that I've learned and just gathered from y'all. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time to do this. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rashonda to speak.
So I just want to echo in Brianna's gratitude. I appreciate our panelists who have taken the time out of their schedules to join us tonight. I appreciate those that are here in community with us, and you all asked some really great questions. I want to also echo, you know, just what our panelists have said in terms of the power in self-discovery. Take some time and just Google, look through Netflix, look through, I mean, if you like documentaries, right now, cable companies are highlighting certain like anti-racist films and other works of art. And so I encourage you all to continue in your discovery, regardless of where you are in terms of your knowledge. I am also going to ask you to continue on in your work. Like, we can't stop here with just this conversation. So to that end, I am going to turn it over now to a member of our leadership team, Saeed Ardi. Saeed is a student and one of the members of our leadership team. He will be working with us this summer as a student fellow. And Saeed is going to tell you, you know, some things that you can do next.
Okay. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Saeed, as just mentioned by Rashonda. I also just want to start off by thanking our panelists today, and also just thanking everyone else who like came to join us today. But yeah, to start off, I really hope you guys can follow us on our social media. Our Twitter and Instagram are Students for Ed Justice. So like just like on this slide right here, students with the number 4 Ed Justice. And our Facebook is Students for Educational Justice. Please check out our website to learn more about us. And if you guys want to donate, you could donate on our website as well. Our website is students4edjustice.org. If you're between the ages of 13 and 21 and live in the New Haven, Connecticut area, please try to come to our weekly Thursday meetings, which are currently online. Yeah, so they're every Thursday, and like, even if you don't know if you can commit, just like try to see one meeting, come to one meeting. If you guys like it, you guys are more than welcome to stay. Encouraged to stay. Check out our community resources. The links will be put in the chat. And I do believe, oh yeah, okay. And then other ways to get involved. So tomorrow, as mentioned by Benny and some of the other panelists, tomorrow is our Juneteenth Liberation Day March/teaching. So basically, like SEJ is collaborating with these other organizations, these other local organizations, to like have a liberation march in light of Juneteenth. Yeah. So like, if you guys, oh sorry, yeah, okay. And this slide addresses, okay, I can't protest, what can I do? So if you can't protest, or if you can't go to marches or rallies, you can donate to memorial funds and bail funds, and make sure that before you guys donate, you guys are looking into the actual research before you're donating, and make sure that you're supporting actual BIPOC and not just big corporations, and like look into like the means, like in the websites which you're donating in, like donating, so that like you're not donating to like some shady company. And then ask local organizers how you can help. So whether it be like supplying transportations to protesters, supplying food and water to protesters, building supply kits for protesters, and yeah, try to donate to local BIPOC organizations and share vital information. And I would argue, most importantly, educate yourself. Like, try to educate yourself, and even you guys being on this virtual meeting today is like a huge step in like clearly showing that you guys are here to educate yourself and learn more about Juneteenth, which is amazing. And I encourage you guys to keep doing that, keep researching, keep trying to educate yourself and trying to educate the people around you. And do remember that we're still in a global pandemic, so please make sure to keep yourself and your family safe. But yeah, I think that's it. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Saeed. So before we wrap up, I just want to say 2 things. One, Students for Educational Justice still has a few Wi-Fi hotspot devices. So if you or someone you know is without Wi-Fi, please reach out to us and let us know. As summer school starts and as many camps prepare to open, I know a lot of them are doing so virtually. And so I want to ensure that our young people have access to the very critical resources that they need. So please feel free to reach out to me directly. I did put my email address into the chat box. I also want to say that SEJ will be working with one of our community partners, an organization, Citywide Youth Coalition, to host at least 2 Undoing Racism trainings this summer. So those will be open to students as well as adults. If you are interested in attending or would like to send your child, we ask that they be at least like 8th grade or older, just due to some of the content. Please reach out to us and I will be able to share that. I am just going to thank you all again for joining us. I encourage you to reach out to any of us that have been panelists or any of the SEJ team members. I encourage you to copy and paste the links that are in the chat box so you have access to them once we end, because there's some excellent resources that have been shared in that box. And continue to do the work and continue to take care of yourselves. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope to see you soon.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, take care. Thank you so much, Benny. Thank you, Frank.
Yes.
Thank you, Dean Nelson. Thank you to our participants. It was great to see your beautiful faces. And I hope that we can continue to work together.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for letting me come. This is fun.
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for taking time of binge watching Housewives to come here.
So funny, because I was actually watching it before this.
A special thank you to Faraji.
Yes, Faraji. That poem was amazing.
Elementary school student, brave
Yes.
enough to share her poetry with us.
Oh, Rashonda, the live.
I will end the live. Thank you.